Again? What did I do to deserve this? Thank you so much. All right. So, the fourth quarter century of the Oscars, modern day, what we were always going to be heading towards, cultural irrelevance. It's really hard to talk about the modern day Oscars without really embracing the simple fact of the matter that no one cares anymore. The heyday of the Oscars that started in the 30s and 40s and actually extended well into the 80s steadily died out over the past few decades to the point where people don't care. You can see that through the ratings, and you know what? I think it's ultimately deserved. The pattern that started in the 80s, where there was a divergence between popular taste and what the Academy wanted to award, just never came back together. There are going to be examples where big movies that won big at the box office ultimately won a lot of Oscars. You think Titanic, you think The Lord of the Rings, but they are very much exceptions, and they end up feeling like the Academy is being dragged kicking and screaming to accept a movie that the rest of the world loved, because they are very much exceptions. So the last video I ended with 2003 and The Return of the King's win. 2004 is really kind of the start of where things go wrong. Not that I think that $1 Million Baby is a bad film. I love $1 Million Baby. I think it's one of Clint Eastwood's best films. But it's a very self-conscious break from The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is a big, grand spectacle that makes you feel good. $1 Million Baby is a very small, character-driven, largely monochromatic film that makes you kind of feel bad. And, you know, that extreme vacillating back and forth is signaling that there continues to be a war within the Academy for what the Oscars even mean. Is it just that $1 Million Baby just happened to be the best movie of the year in 2004, and The Lord of the Rings just happened to be the best movie of the year in 2003? There's a certain possibility to that, but having gone through the entire history of the Oscars, I say no. I say that this is the industry at war with itself about what the Oscars even mean. And the dominant thread over the past 50 years has been that the people are wrong. Maybe it's more like 40 years, but that's ultimately what you end up seeing. So what you end up seeing across the last 22 years or so of Oscars is this dominant thread of awarding increasingly smaller films that make even less money at the box office. I think that the number of times least successful box office winner at that won Best Picture applied to like 4 different movies over this period. It just got smaller and smaller and smaller. The opening of this period, though, there's some hope. None of these movies were huge, but you know, they represented the last dying embers of this effort on the part of the Academy to try to find some kind of middle ground with audiences. So you start with $1 Million Maybe. It actually made a couple $100 million. It was not a box office bomb by any measure. Then you have things like Crash, which was actually out for a full year before it won. It was actually released in the year before. I'm sure there's some like reason why it was actually eligible for the Best Picture award in 2005 when it was actually released in the previous year. But whatever, I mean, you know, that made decent money. The Departed actually made really good money. That is mostly about saying, hey, Martin Scorsese, sorry about Dances with Wolves, sorry about Ordinary People, here's your award. You know, which was great for Marty. You know, love the guy, never met him, but love him, glad he finally got some, you know, official recognition. And then you have things like No Country for Old Men, which again, it's like they're genre exercises that are actually making decent money. They're very, very, very far from the best money makers in the world at the time, but they're making decent money. However, the year to really talk about is 2008. 2008 was the year when the Oscars told the people to screw off. Now, I love The Dark Knight, I do, but my opinion of The Dark Knight is not important to this. What's important is that The Dark Knight was a hugely successful movie that was extremely well received critically, and that everyone assumed would at least get a Best Picture nomination. And it was shut out. Not completely out of the Oscars. Obviously, Heath Ledger won for his performance as the Joker posthumously. But the actual movie itself did not receive a Best Picture nomination. And it feels like this very intentional movement on the part of the Academy to say popular taste doesn't matter. We are not going to be moved by popular taste. And things just kind of started falling off the rails afterwards. Not that everything was a money loser or didn't make any money at all. I immediately think of The King's Speech, which actually made about $400 million at the worldwide box office, which, good money for the little movie that it is. But then, the very next year after The Dark Knight, The Hurt Locker won. And The Hurt Locker didn't make $50 million at the box office. It was tiny. It was the worst box office performer to win Best Picture ever at the time. And several other movies have gained that title since. You have movies like The Artist, which was the last hurrah of Harvey Weinstein buying an Oscar. You have things like Moonlight, which didn't make $100 million. You have things like Spotlight, which didn't make $100 million. Again, not that these movies are bad or necessarily undeserving of the idea that they may be the best movie of the year, but we are so far removed from where the Oscars started. And the Oscars started in a place where the basic award, the Best Production Award, the Outstanding Picture Award, was exclusively given to giant box office successes. Where in those early years, in those early decades, the movies were consistently in the top 10 at the very least, usually the top 3 box office performers. It's something of like, I guess, a secret that no one really understands, but that's where the Academy built its cultural cachet. It was from the 20s through into like the 80s, where they were taking fairly large movies that were making a lot of money and giving them the big awards. So it was this dance between the Academy and the public saying, okay, well, what is the best movie of the year out of the movies that the people tended to go see, out of the movies that the people actually knew about. And that really changed in the 80s. With movies like Terms of Endearment, with movies like Out of Africa. These weren't necessarily bad films. I'm not a big Out of Africa fan, but these were not necessarily bad films, and the cultural cachet from the Oscars helped them end up making money, creating the Best Picture bump at the box office, which was a very real thing for a long time. But it steadily died out. So like I don't think the Best Picture bump really existed past the 90s. Shakespeare in Love had a Best Picture bump at the box office, but it was minimal. It made a few million extra dollars after it won, and considering the cut between theaters and the studio, I'm not sure the studio got much of anything out of those sales. And then you're getting into, the actual period that I'm discussing here, and you're talking about movies like Spotlight, which made like $90 million at the box office. $90 million at the box office in 2015 is nothing. I mean, it's not quite nothing. You know, it's like it managed to play the major markets, it managed to get a wide release, it managed to get people in, but you're so far removed from anything like mass appeal, and you're consistently giving the awards to these tiny little movies that no one has really seen. Again, there are exceptions. Argo made a couple $100 million. You know, it's essentially kind of an action movie, an action thriller. And, you know, it was directed by Ben Affleck, so it's a celebration of actors. You know, it's part of one of those major strains of narrative that runs through the Oscars over the course of the decades, where, you know, actor makes good and celebrates Hollywood, so we're going to give him the Best Picture win. And then I really feel like the only real topic is that cultural influence, and I feel like it's gone. You know, it's not that there is none at all, and I think of the movie Nomadland. So Nomadland won in 2020, and it won in the year of COVID. So it's like no one was going to the theater, box office was trash, and so the Academy ended up awarding a film that literally no one had seen. I think it had like a $2 million box office at the time. You can blame a lot of that on COVID, but ultimately this is an environment where, hey, no one's going to go see movies. Out of the movies that no one has seen, find the one that no one has seen the most. It's really weird. But what I care about is the cultural influence that happened after that. So, you know, there's no great way to measure this. And so I was looking at numbers from both the Internet Movie Database and Letterboxd. And just like, how did the number of ratings, not the actual average of ratings, I don't care about that, but just the number of ratings change over time? It will always increase, it will never decrease. So what happens over time with it? And as I can show, you know, I found this handy graph for IMDb ratings over time, and there is actual increased interest about Nomadland over the course of a certain period. And we actually see kind of very late, very recently, another big uptick that kind of feels completely unnatural, most likely related to Chloe Zhao's most recent movie, Hamnet, coming out. And, you know, it looks somewhat impressive. You know, it's the nomination and the win seem to have actually kind of pushed things up. But then when you actually look at the actual numbers, it's kind of pathetic. Before it won, like literally the day before it won, it had what, like 65,000 ratings on the IMDb. And it had, you know, a similar number on Letterboxd. And like the next day, it increased, people were interested and were able to find it and be able to do it. But it's like, you know, it's like a 10% growth. You know, it's a few thousand people. A month later, it's a little bit more. A year later, we're talking like it might have a little more than doubled the number of viewers. And we're talking about, okay, so you can't say that this is just the total number of people who've seen it. You know, Letterboxd and IMDb may have, you know, people who are rating both, and they obviously don't represent the entire public who go sees movies, who just see a movie and then say that was good or that was bad, and that's the end of it, obviously. But, you know, let's be generous about this and say that they represent like 10% of the number of people who've seen it. You're talking about maybe a couple million people who decided to check out Nomadland because of the Best Picture win, out of a country of over 300 million. And these ratings are not limited to just Americans. Where is the cultural cachet? Where is it? Bringing a couple million just movie fans across the world to go see a movie that they've never heard of, that they only would have heard of because it won Best Picture, is paltry. We are so far removed from something like The Apartment winning, from something like even Tom Jones winning. Tom Jones's box office was better than this. Where did the cultural cachet go? Now, you can talk about politics, you can talk about how The Hurt Locker was obviously some kind of middle ground between trying to be political because of the Iraq War, but also just trying to like be a movie because the movie itself isn't actually that political. The overall cultural space that Hollywood decided to occupy, where it just decided to become more aggressively and obviously political. But I think it has more to do with the fact that the mystique of Hollywood died out. Why should I care about Hollywood? And just picking this up within the context of the Best Picture wins, they became less relevant to the interests of the people over time. And you can really pull that back into the 80s when the Academy very obviously decided we are not going to cater to popular interests at all. We are going to lead. And you can only lead people where they want to follow. And people did not want to follow to Nomadland. I'm sorry, they just didn't want to go to Nomadland. And so people see, oh, well, Nomadland won Best Picture. That sounds boring. I don't care. And you just have year after year after year of this, where the movies that people knew were getting completely ignored, and the movies that people had never heard of were getting elevated. And that can only last so long before you just realize that the people's tastes are not that. Now, I'm not saying these movies are good or bad. That's not it. It's just this difference in taste between what the insiders in Hollywood want, what the industry itself wants to project to the world, and what it actually is in terms of what the actual people who go to pay for tickets to see these movies think of it. It seems like people think of the movies now as a big roller coaster because that's what they've been fed for the last 40 years. And the Academy saying roller coasters are dumb, keep paying for them so we can have awards for movies you hate, is just not a recipe for cultural relevance. And I think the last couple of years are interesting, continuing to show the kind of war within Hollywood. So a couple years ago, Oppenheimer won. Oppenheimer made $1 billion at the box office. Helped probably in a good amount by the whole Barbenheimer thing, where Barbie and Oppenheimer were released on the same day and a bunch of people went to see both. And it just kind of became a cultural thing. I don't know how much of that was a real thing. They both made a lot of money. I'm suspect of social media trends being real. But it obviously had some kind of play. Made $1 billion, and it felt like a moment where the Academy was saying, we get it. We're going to find the kinds of movies that people are going to go see that also appeal to us. It's that search for the middle ground again. Chris Nolan had been, making a bunch of money for Warner Brothers and then Universal for years. He probably should have been nominated in 2008 for The Dark Knight. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we'll give it to you, Chris. Congratulations, Mr. Nolan, you won. And $1 billion, movie about nuclear war, strong central performance. Cillian Murphy is not a star, but he's a respected actor. And, it feels like this coalescing of different ideas in one movie. And a large part of that is popularity. And so the following year comes up, and I am convinced that Wicked is going to win. Convinced. I still haven't seen the first Wicked. I saw the second Wicked and was bored out of my skull. But I was convinced the first Wicked was going to win. Made a bunch of money. The industry loved it. Steven Spielberg was saying very nice things about it right before the awards. And, it's just like, okay, we're going to continue cultural relevance. But, there's this kind of metatextual political element that we can grasp onto because the story is about like diversity and stuff. It felt like the perfect mix of everything. And then it goes with Anora. We've had several movies that were the smallest at the box office to win Best Picture. Anora is the most recent. I really like Anora. Anora is really good. Holy crap, did they go in the completely different direction. it's just, a movie about a stripper, about a prostitute who, marries and has to get a divorce, and it's like sad and surprisingly emotional in the end, is not the stuff of mass appeal. It recalls to me Midnight Cowboy. Midnight Cowboy is in a similar vein. It's less explicit, but it's still about like sex workers and stuff who end up like dying. Okay, no one dies at the end of Anora. Spoilers, but they're kind of in that same vein. But Midnight Cowboy came out in 1970 when the Oscars, when the Academy had real cultural influence, and the Best Picture win could convince people to go see it. Plus, you're in the middle of the countercultural era where things like Easy Rider just a year before are making a bunch of money. So it's kind of a perfect fit for that period. Anora is not. Anora it's kind of out of step with the larger cultural space, and the Academy went with it. Now, is that to say Anora is bad? No, I really like Anora. My opinion about the actual quality of the films is not important to this. What's important is that the Academy is self-consciously moving away from what made the Academy culturally relevant. It is now culturally irrelevant. And it is entirely the Academy's own fault. They decided to prioritize obscure titles with little mass appeal, trying to lead the people towards a particular taste profile that the rest of the industry is not preparing them for. So then what becomes the point of the Oscars? I'll talk about that in another video, but looking at what's nominated this year, I've seen almost none of them. I kind of loved Frankenstein. I don't think I've seen any of the others. I guess it's going to be one battle after another that wins, which made decent money. Stars a movie star, kind of makes sense. It's sort of like milquetoast in terms of like what goes into a movie that wins Best Picture over the last 20 years. It's kind of a milquetoast entry, in terms of box office, star power, director profile, that sort of thing. I haven't seen it. I hear it's really good. I'll watch it eventually, especially if it wins. But it's just in terms of like the actual like kind of metatextual elements that go into it, it kind of feels middle of the road and will probably end up winning. So, we'll see. But it's again, it's just kind of a continuation of, hey, we don't really care what the popular taste is. We're just going to do what we want, which is, fine. But when Louis B. Mayer started this, he had a vision of, trying to like bring the Academy, bring the entire industry together to make movies that helped the industry grow. And that kind of steadily remained in place for decades, with individual entries kind of going off in different directions. But mostly the narrative across all of it is we are rewarding movies that have mass appeal. And the studios have changed the taste of mass appeal starting in the 80s, but the actual awards ceremonies just won't catch up. Or, they're going off in another direction, or whatever it is, whatever the analogy needs to be. It's just not there anymore. So, what else is there to say other than the Oscars are kind of irrelevant now, which is, kind of explains why I don't really care about them. But yeah, that's that. So now it's time for what would David have voted for? So what would David have voted for? Just like the previous ones, this is just, what I would have voted for if I had been an Academy member at the time. It does not necessarily mean that I think the winner is bad. It does not necessarily mean that I think the winner is the only possible choice. It's just, what would I have voted for? So we start with 2004. That was the year that $1 Million Baby won. And I love $1 Million Baby. I think it's a great movie. I think it's one of Clint Eastwood's best movies. I would have voted for The Aviator. I think The Aviator is just a shade better, perhaps, but I kind of get into it a bit more. I think it is a wonderful example of Martin Scorsese's technical achievements, and it's surprisingly touching at the same time. I love it. Moving on to 2005, this is the year that Crash won. And Crash is widely regarded as one of the worst Best Picture winners, and it's easy to see why. It's melodramatic nonsense. I would have voted for Capote. Capote is great. It has that great Philip Seymour Hoffman central performance. Bennett Miller just makes, like, his precision in his craft is incredible, and I find the movie incredibly involving, and I love it. I think it's great. Moving on to 2006 is The Departed. That's the year The Departed won, where the Pity Award finally arrived for Martin Scorsese for his violent, bare-knuckle Boston gangster movie. And you know what? I would have voted for The Departed. I love Martin Scorsese. I think he makes great movies. I actually think that The Departed is like top 10 in his entire filmography. I think it's great, and I love it, and I give no apologies for that. I don't think it's lesser Scorsese. I think it's great, and I think it deserved it. 2007 was the year that No Country for Old Men won, and No Country for Old Men is great, but you know what? I would have voted for There Will Be Blood. I find There Will Be Blood to be just a small shade better. Paul Thomas Anderson's just portrait of the oil baron, Daniel Plainview, is meticulous and precise and terrifying and wonderful to observe, and I love it. It's just a shade more than No Country for Old Men. 2008 was the year that Slumdog Millionaire won. And you know what? I'm not the biggest fan of Slumdog Millionaire, but I do think it's the best movie of the 5 that were nominated. The rest are fine. Milk, Frost Nixon, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Reader. Actually, I don't like The Reader. But it's Slumdog Millionaire is just kind of nice and fun and life-affirming, and I enjoy it. And you know, it's far from Danny Boyle's best work, but I do think it's the best of the crop from that year that was nominated. It's pretty good. It's far from my favorite, but it's pretty good. 2009 was the year that The Hurt Locker won. And I find The Hurt Locker kind of weird, pretty good. It's far from my favorite. But this was the first year that they actually expanded the nominees to beyond 5 because of The Dark Knight the previous year. And I would have probably chosen A Serious Man. A Serious Man by the Coen brothers is hilarious, and I love it. And I think it's kind of the best movie of that year. And I was mostly just glad Avatar didn't win that year because I found Avatar kind of dull. 2010 was the year that The King's Speech won. And you know, I really like The King's Speech. I think The King's Speech is really good. It's really weirdly directed by Tom Hooper, but you know what? It's really good. However, I wouldn't have voted for it. I would have voted for The Social Network. David Fincher's incredible portrait of a slightly fictionalized Mark Zuckerberg's rise to power is incredibly marvelous to watch. It's just a wonderful entertainment. It's kind of that perfect application of Fincher's cold style, but it's propulsive. It's got that great Johnny Greenwood score, and you know what? It would have gotten my vote. 2011 was the year that The Artist won. And you know what? This year would have been really hard for me. I really like The Artist, but it's nothing compared to some of the other nominees. Some of the other nominees were Hugo by Scorsese, The Tree of Life by Malick, and Moneyball by Bennett Miller. It's like, those are 3 of my favorite movies from the last 30 years. I absolutely adore all 3, but I would have ended up voting for The Tree of Life. I think The Tree of Life is a staggering masterpiece, and I absolutely love it. I completely operate on Terrence Malick's wavelength, and I think it is a crowning achievement amongst crowning achievements. So yes, I would have voted for The Tree of Life. 2012 was the year that Argo won. Now, Argo's pretty good. It feels very fake in the end, but you know what? It's amusing. I would have voted for Life of Pi. Ang Lee's adaptation of the novel is beautiful and heart-wrenching and touching, and it's just kind of an incredible achievement, and I think it would have gotten my vote. 2013 was the year that 12 Years a Slave won. And 12 Years a Slave is great. It's harrowing. It is a full-on horror movie set in the American Deep South in the antebellum period, and it's utterly convincing and utterly gut-wrenching. It is a very difficult watch. It is one of the lowest earning box office performers that won Best Picture, but you know what? It probably would have gotten my vote. It's kind of a great film. I love it. 2014 is the year that Birdman won. And Birdman is kind of a trick, the long takes and stuff, and I find it interesting. I just don't find actors that interesting, and it is a movie about actors, so whatever. I would have gone for Wes Anderson's The Grand Budapest Hotel. The Grand Budapest Hotel is a wonderful entertainment. It has that hand-created quality that Anderson brings to every movie. It's really funny, it's surprisingly exciting, and I don't know if it's his best film, but it's up there. I would have voted for The Grand Budapest Hotel. 2015 was the year that Spotlight won. And you know what? Spotlight's great. It's really, really good. It's really harrowing. It's really like immediate, and like again, it's one of those movies that is essentially a thriller, just people talking in rooms. But you know what? I would have voted for Mad Max Fury Road. Mad Max Fury Road is just an incredible achievement. I absolutely love it. It is just a technical marvel, and it's incredibly exciting and incredibly fun, surprisingly touching, and I love it. Yes, Mad Max Fury Road would have gotten my vote. 2016 was the year that Moonlight won, and Moonlight's good. It's very inward facing. I find it hard to like get into because it's so everyone's kind of so stoic. But I would have voted for Hacksaw Ridge. Mel Gibson's story of Desmond Doss is incredibly involving. Mel Gibson brings his incredible precision to an incredibly well-told tale, and I really think it is one of his best movies out of the small handful that he made, and I probably would have voted for that. 2017 is the year that The Shape of Water won, and it pains me to say this, but I don't like The Shape of Water. I love Guillermo del Toro, I really do, but The Shape of Water is the one movie of his that doesn't work for me. I would have voted for Dunkirk. I love Dunkirk. I find it took me a couple of viewings to kind of get on its wavelength. You know, he plays with time, and he essentially tells you early what he's doing, but it's kind of hard to get on the wavelength the first viewing. Once I'm on it, I love it. I think it works incredibly well. I think it's a huge technical achievement on his part, and I find it wonderfully entertaining. 2018 was the year that Green Book won, and Green Book is milquetoast. The drama is essentially over by the 40-minute mark, and then it just kind of keeps going for another hour and a half or so. I find it kind of dull. It made a lot of money at the box office, so good job for Peter Farrelly, but I find it kind of dull. I would have voted for The Favorite. Yorgos Lanthimos' like bizarre portrait of Queen Anne is just really funny and surprisingly touching. It kind of feels like an accident that he made a movie that the Academy would really like. But yes, I would have voted for The Favorite. 2019 was the year that Parasite won, and I kind of love Parasite. I prefer Park Chan-wook over Bong Joon-ho, but you know what? It is really good. It's a very black comedy, and I kind of get into it. But this is the year that Sam Mendes made 1917, and I adore 1917. I'm not in love with the camera trickery. I do feel like the movie could do without it, but I absolutely love how it's written, performed, and executed outside of the single camera trick thing. Really kind of two shots. There's a break halfway. Anyway, but it is one of my favorite movies of the last few years, and I would have easily voted for 1917. 2020 was the year that Nomadland won, and I don't really like Nomadland. I find it dull. And you know what I would have easily voted for? It was Minari. It's a surprisingly touching little movie about an Asian family in the Deep South that works remarkably well. It's kind of just wonderful in its execution. And that the guy ended up making one of the better legacy sequels in Twisters is kind of a fun irony, but ultimately it's like Minari would have gotten my vote. 2021 was the year that Apple bought their Best Picture winner. This is when Coda won, and Coda is fine. It's essentially a Lifetime movie. It looks flat, I don't really get into it, but it's fine, it's functional, whatever. However, this is the year that Guillermo del Toro made what might be his most underappreciated film in Nightmare Alley. When I first watched Nightmare Alley, I read the book and then I watched the 50s version right before, and then I watched Del Toro's version, and I love Del Toro's version. I think it's wonderful. I think it is his this beautiful, colorful thing that is just this tale of a monster and his downfall. It's pure nihilism because, you know, the author himself was essentially a nihilist. He was an alcoholic who kind of lost everything over the course of his life. But it's like, I love it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful picture, and I really, really get into it. 2022 was the year that Everything Everywhere All at Once won. And I like it. I think it's pretty good. It kind of took over the internet that year and everyone just kind of pushed for it. But you know what? I think Triangle of Sadness is better. I think Triangle of Sadness is funnier. I think it's really darkly funny, and I just have that dark sense of humor. And I really got into it. I really found it amusing. And yes, I would have voted for Triangle of Sadness. 2023 was the year that Oppenheimer won, and I think Oppenheimer is really good. It's an incredible achievement on the part of Christopher Nolan. I have some issues with how it deals with one of the main the main antagonistic character, but ultimately it's just kind of a marvelous achievement. And yeah, it probably would have gotten my vote. None of the other movies released that year really hit me in the same way, and yeah, I probably would have voted for Oppenheimer. 2024 was the year that Anora won. And as I said, Anora is really good, I really like it. But I think I would have ended up voting for Conclave. Conclave is kind of weird in that I don't buy it on a realistic level, but in terms of just its execution of its thriller elements, it's really, really fun. And I think I might have ended up voting for Conclave. It's fun. Anora is really good, but so is Conclave in kind of a different way. I think I would have ended up voting for Conclave. So what about this year? Well, I've seen precious few of the nominees, and if I really had to put my vote on something, it would be Frankenstein. But I have not seen One Battle After Another. I have not seen Marty Supreme. I have not seen Begonia. I've not seen Sentimental Value. I have not seen The Secret Agent. I've not seen Hamnet. So I coming into this with a very limited perspective. I would probably vote for Frankenstein, but if I were to actually watch the other like 6 I haven't seen, I would probably change my vote to something else. I don't know. I really like Frankenstein. I think it's really good, but I'm assuming something else would pop up. All right, that being said, that's it. That is all of the nominees. That is all of the winners. I'm done. Until the next video, where I will go into the winners with even more depth. But that's it. So yeah, we're done for now.